At the end of World War II, the fate of Adolf Hitler became one of history's greatest mysteries. The official story said he shot himself in the Berlin bunker. His body burned as the city fell. Yet almost at once, doubts began to spread. Declassified military documents spoke of secret escape routes, submarines surfacing on the Argentine coast, and remote estates built in Patagonia. Hidden bank transfers and witness accounts pointed toward South America as a planned refuge for the Nazi elite. At the center of this was Martin Bormann, orchestrating gold shipments and safe havens far from Europe's ruins. Decades of investigations will soon follow. Was Hitler's end truly in Berlin? Or did he escape to live unseen in another world? Gold, oil, and oceans. Long before Berlin burned, Hitler's regime was already thinking in these terms. If the Reich was to endure, or if its leaders were ever forced to flee, they needed resources, networks, and control of the seas. That is why October 1942 mattered. At that moment, Nazi Germany stood at the height of its power. In North Africa, Erwin Rommel pushed toward the Suez Canal, his Africa Corps straining against British lines at El Alamein. In the east, Friedrich Paulus's Sixth Army pressed into the ruins of Stalingrad, where every street corner became a battlefield. The German map stretched from Norway's frozen fjords to the deserts of Libya, from the French Atlantic coast deep into Soviet territory. Oil in the Caucasus and Middle East stood as the prize. Hitler believed if those fields could be seized, the Reich would guarantee the fuel needed for a war meant to last a generation. While armies clashed on land, the Battle of the Atlantic threatened to decide the war at sea. Under Admiral Karl Dönitz, German U-boats prowled shipping lanes with brutal efficiency. The ocean became a hunting ground. Britain, still dependent on lifelines from Canada and the United States, watched its survival hang on convoys of grain, oil, and steel. At Bletchley Park, British codebreakers who had been reading German signals suddenly faced silence. In February 1942, the Enigma code was altered to a new version nicknamed Shark, cutting off Allied insight into submarine movements. For months, convoys sailed blind through the mid-Atlantic, into waters known as the Black Pit, beyond the reach of air cover. One of the darkest episodes came with convoy SC-107, which left Halifax in late October 1942. 42 merchant ships, escorted by a modest Canadian force, steered into the North Atlantic. Waiting for them was a wolf pack of 13 U-boats, the Valian Group. Over several days, submarines struck with precision. U-402, U-84, U-522, U-89, and U-132 all made their kills, slipping between destroyers under cover of night. Explosions tore through the convoy. Tankers and freighters burned. Men leapt into freezing waters, and distress signals echoed unanswered. By the end, 15 ships were sunk and 4 more crippled. More than 100,000 tons of cargo vanished beneath the waves. For the Allies, it was not just a loss of material, but a reminder of how fragile their lifeline had become. November 1942 marked the peak of German success at sea. That month alone, U-boats sent over 700,000 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. For the year, totals reached more than 6 million tons. The numbers were staggering, especially as new submarines slid out of shipyards faster than losses could be replaced. Behind this machine stood German industry, powered by slave labor and the plunder of occupied lands. Companies like IG Farben and Krupp turned human misery into weapons, while trains carried looted gold, machinery, and raw materials westward. Even as Allied bombers struck German cities, production grew. Inside the Reich, the conviction hardened. Control the Atlantic, seize the oil, and victory would follow. But cracks, invisible in the moment, had already begun to form. Retreat defined the winter of 1942. In North Africa, the desert that had once carried Rommel's victories now turned against him. At El Alamein, British General Bernard Montgomery broke through Axis lines in late October, pushing the Afrika Korps into retreat. A few days later, on November 8th, Allied forces under Dwight Eisenhower landed in Morocco and Algeria during Operation Torch. It was a coordinated strike from the west, while Montgomery pressed from the east. Rommel's men, who once dreamed of reaching the Suez Canal, now scrambled toward Tunisia, their supply lines shattered and their momentum gone. What had been billed as the Desert Fox's domain became another front collapsing under Allied weight. Far to the east, disaster struck with even greater force. In November 1942, the Soviet Union launched Operation Uranus, a massive counteroffensive that surrounded Friedrich Paulus and the German Sixth Army in Stalingrad. What Hitler declared would never fall became a steel trap. Temperatures plummeted below -30 degrees Celsius. Soldiers huddled in ruins, gnawed on frozen horse meat, and in some accounts, resorted to cannibalism. Hermann Göring had promised the army could be supplied by air, but the Luftwaffe managed only a fraction of what was needed. By late January 1943, the Soviets rejected Paulus's plea for terms. On February 2nd, the once proud Sixth Army surrendered, leaving nearly 300,000 men dead, captured, or missing. For the first time, the myth of German invincibility shattered. Inside Germany, the mood shifted. Allied bombers now hit Hamburg, Cologne, and Essen with increasing frequency. Civilians dug shelters as cities burned. Meanwhile, Albert Speer, Hitler's armaments minister, reorganized production lines using forced labor pulled from occupied countries and concentration camps. The machine still worked, but it did so under constant strain. Within intelligence circles abroad, new signals emerged. In Switzerland, OSS officer Alan Dulles reported whispers of German officials seeking contact, probing the idea of negotiation as the front lines buckled. The facade of unity inside the Reich was cracking. Martin Bormann read these shifts with cold precision. As Hitler's secretary and gatekeeper, he understood the need for insurance. In late 1942 and early 1943, his network began creating front companies in Switzerland and Spain, opening secret bank accounts, and forging identity papers. Bormann secured contacts with Argentine firms willing to channel funds and property across the Atlantic. Every defeat made his work more urgent. What began as quiet preparation for the Reich's long future now transformed into something else, the architecture of escape. And all of it accelerated as defeat loomed closer. Martin Bormann was born in 1900, the son of a postmaster in Prussia. He joined the Nazi Party in 1927. At first, he was little more than a diligent functionary, but Bormann had a gift that others lacked. He could organize money and people into quiet obedience. By 1931, he was working with Rudolf Hess and soon gained a reputation for ruthless efficiency. His rise was not flashy, but it was steady. Industry noticed. By 1933, when Hitler took power, Bormann was already positioned to handle the financial lifeblood of the new regime. One of his earliest tools was the Adolf Hitler Fund, established in 1933. On the surface, it looked like voluntary donations from German industry to support the Führer. In practice, it was a slush fund. Krupp, Thyssen, IG Farben, and Daimler-Benz all poured money into it, buying influence while filling Hitler's coffers. Bormann managed the accounts with meticulous care, turning loyalty into currency. By 1936, he was rewarded with the post of head of the party chancellery. From that point on, no decree or appointment passed without his hand. He did not speak loudly, but he controlled the flow of paper. And in Nazi Germany, paper meant power. Bormann's authority extended beyond bureaucratic duties. He handled Hitler's personal finances, properties, and estates. He was the gatekeeper, filtering who saw the Führer and what information reached him. He oversaw the transfer of confiscated assets, gold bars from occupied banks, jewels taken from families, paintings seized from museums, into hidden depots and secret accounts. When the Allied blockade cut Germany off from hard currency, Bormann turned to Swiss banks. He negotiated discreetly, ensuring Reich wealth could be converted into francs and dollars that would remain useful even if the regime fell. His reach stretched into the forced labor system that drove German industry. As millions were deported from occupied territories into camps and factories, Bormann monitored the quotas and contracts that supplied companies like IG Farben with slave workers. This was not just administration, it was the machinery of exploitation, maintained with cold calculation. From 1943 onward, his role shifted further. With the war turning against Germany, Bormann became the silent architect of survival. He sat in on every decision, drafted decrees, and made sure the Reich's wealth and networks could outlive battlefield defeat. He coordinated contacts in neutral nations, from Sweden to Spain, arranging shipments of strategic supplies and negotiating discreet favors. At the same time, he quietly studied South America, particularly Argentina, as a refuge. Ranches, front companies, and safe houses were evaluated and prepared. By the end of 1943, Bormann was no longer just a secretary. He had become the keeper of secrets, operating a parallel state designed to function even in collapse. Every connection he built, every account he opened, needed fuel. That fuel was wealth, real, movable, and hidden. And so the Reich began to strip Europe bare. Paintings vanished by the thousands. In Paris, men of the ER, Einsatzstab Reichsleiter Rosenberg, marched into museums and private homes with ledgers and stamps. The Rothschild collection was among their first targets, lifted from safes and salons as if centuries of history were nothing but spoils. Across Warsaw, Kiev, Amsterdam, and Brussels, the same process unfolded. Canvases were pried from walls, sculptures dragged from pedestals, manuscripts sealed in crates. What Hitler had ordered was not plunder for its own sake, but the raw material for his dream, the Führer Museum in Linz, a place meant to showcase European culture as rewritten by conquest. Furniture, silverware, and even children's toys did not escape. The so-called M-Action stripped Jewish homes bare, room by room, down to carpets and clocks. What could not be sold went to warehouses. What was precious traveled on special trains. Between 1941 and 1943, more than 130 convoys left Paris alone, bound for depots hidden deep in Bavaria and Austria. Neuschwanstein Castle became one vast storeroom, its chambers filled not with fairy tale murals, but stolen canvases. The Altausee salt mines in Austria held masterpieces stacked like firewood, kept safe in the cool, dry dark. Behind the operation was not just Rosenberg's staff, but Bormann's eye. He understood that a Rembrandt or a Vermeer could buy loyalty as effectively as cash. Some works were held back, funneled through black markets, or offered as bribes to neutral bankers. Every object carried weight, currency for survival, or a tool to stitch Nazi wealth into Europe's financial networks. Not everyone looked away. In Paris, Rose Vaillant, a quiet curator at the Jeu de Paume Museum, secretly copied inventories of every painting that passed through her hands. Fluent in German, she memorized conversations, wrote down train numbers, and built a record that would later guide Allied recovery teams. Her notebooks became one of the most important weapons against disappearance. By 1944, as bombs rained on German cities, depots were shifted deeper into the Alps. SS guards oversaw armored trains moving treasures under cover of night. Orders were even drafted to destroy caches rather than let them fall into enemy hands. In the final months, crates were hidden in monasteries, caves, and abandoned mines. Thousands of pieces would vanish into the fog of retreat, their whereabouts still unknown. The Reich had promised eternity. What remained was Europe stripped bare. And yet even that was not enough. Stacks of gold glimmered under flickering lamps in the vaults of Vienna, Brussels, and Amsterdam. Men in SS uniforms moved quickly, counting bars, melting bullion, stamping out origins. By 1944, central banks across Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, Czechoslovakia, and France had been systematically plundered. Private collections, jewelry from concentration camp victims, even heirlooms confiscated under the M-Action found their way into hidden crates. The goal was not mere theft, it was survival. Insurance for a Reich on the brink of collapse. Switzerland became the nerve center of this operation. The Swiss National Bank, alongside the Bank for International Settlements, converted melted gold into hard currency. Front companies in Lisbon, Madrid, and Zurich distributed unmarked bars to waiting agents. Declassified documents reveal hundreds of millions of dollars flowed this way, always meticulously tracked by Bormann's operatives. Spain and Portugal accepted the gold in exchange for tungsten and other critical materials. Each transaction, each ledger entry, was another brick in a hidden highway from Europe to the distant southern continents. By 1943, as German forces retreated from Stalingrad and El Alamein, the urgency increased. Gold became a strategic weapon. Some paid for weapons and supplies. Some lubricated the networks of officials in neutral countries, and some flowed steadily toward South America, where front companies in Argentina, Brazil, and Chile waited to convert currency into property, ranches, and safe houses. Cargo planes carried diplomatic pouches, small bundles of untraceable wealth that could tip a scale, bribe an officer, or fund a clandestine flight to freedom. Even the Allies could not track it all. U-boats departed from Vigo and Mar del Plata, submarines designed for stealth, carrying gold, documents, and sometimes men. By the war's end, an estimated 700 tons of Nazi gold rested in Switzerland alone, a reserve unseen by the world, fueling networks of spies, fugitives, and secret operations. Without it, Bormann's vision of escape, of a parallel Reich that could survive beyond defeat, would have been impossible. Every bar, every crate, every transfer whispered the same thing. Europe was emptied, but the Reich's ambitions, its people, its leaders, its secrets, were far from finished. Documents rattled in briefcases, typewriters clicked in dim offices, and Bormann plotted a Reich reborn on a different continent. By mid-1944, Action Fireland was no longer planned. It was deployed. As Allied forces pushed across France after D-Day, Bormann coordinated the movement of men, money, and materials toward South America. Every step relied on precision. Coded messages through neutral embassies, front companies in Buenos Aires and Montevideo, and trusted businessmen like Ludwig Freude, whose access to Juan Perón opened doors no German official could reach alone. In parallel, Operation Bernhard continued its secret work. Prisoners in Sachsenhausen and Flossenburg produced counterfeit British pounds and US dollars with astonishing skill. Sheets of forged notes were bundled and prepared to pay for supplies, bribe officials, and fund the web of networks Bormann had built. Even as German cities burned under Allied bombing in late 1944, the presses never stopped. Currency moved invisibly across Europe, through Spain, into Lisbon, and then by submarine to the South Atlantic. The Argentine coast became the focal point of extraction. Submarines like U-530 and U-233 departed from Bay of Biscay ports and slipped across the Atlantic, arriving at Mar del Plata with men, machines, and cargo. Mobile printing presses, forged passports, and crates of supplies were unloaded in secret, often under the cover of night. Meanwhile, front companies purchased properties in Patagonia, ranches, and remote estates around Bariloche, creating hidden refuges capable of sheltering high-ranking Nazis and key technicians. Secondary routes threaded through German communities in Chile and Brazil, providing alternatives if a shipment or escape went wrong. By early 1945, Bormann's plan had become an intricate web, connecting ports, airstrips, banks, and rural hideaways. SS leaders, engineers, scientists, and their families were prepared to vanish from Europe entirely. Every decision considered contingencies: Allied patrols, Soviet advances, the collapse of German infrastructure, even betrayal within their own ranks. South America was no longer a distant dream. It was a carefully mapped sanctuary, ready to receive the remnants of a crumbling Reich. And the operation waited, poised to execute the largest exodus of fugitives Europe had ever seen. Reports tumbled onto desks in London, Washington, and Bern. Files stamped with secrecy revealed missing officers, suspicious transfers, and encrypted communications traced to neutral banks. The Allies had assembled specialist units like 30 Commando, conceived by Ian Fleming, to seize documents, technology, and anything that could expose Nazi networks. Lists of Gestapo officers, SS personnel, and collaborators were circulated, but the fog of war made certainty nearly impossible. As Berlin burned in April 1945, the Allies were chasing shadows. In the chaos, Nazi leaders scattered. Some destroyed papers, others vanished into Bavaria, Austria, or northern Italy. Forged documents slipped into the hands of those willing to help. Local sympathizers guided convoys across borders, and entire trains were rerouted to avoid Allied patrols. In retreat, Allied forces sometimes stumbled on intelligence about hidden escape routes leading to Spain, Portugal, and even North Africa. The term rat lines began to circulate, secret paths arranged by sympathizers and, occasionally, facilitated by clerics in the Vatican. Meanwhile, OSS agents in Switzerland and Spain meticulously traced financial networks. Hundreds of millions in looted funds, laundered through Swiss banks and converted into untraceable currency, pointed to South America. Alan Dulles, stationed in Bern, began establishing contacts with Germans seeking deals to save themselves. Every bank transfer, every front company, every coded message formed part of a map that could potentially expose the escape network. The hunt became global. Once Berlin fell, efforts extended across continents. Nazi hunters like Simon Wiesenthal and Jewish organizations tracked individuals in hiding. Allied intelligence compiled blacklists of high-ranking officers, cross-referencing sightings, transit records, and financial trails. At the same time, clandestine networks such as Odessa moved to shield fugitives, transporting money, providing false identities, and ensuring escape routes remained operational. By 1945, the search for missing leaders was no longer a local operation. It had transformed into a worldwide manhunt, a tense game of tracking ghosts across borders, oceans, and continents, where every lead could vanish overnight. And yet many of the players were already slipping beyond reach. Smoke crawled through the crumbling streets of Berlin. Bombed-out buildings groaned under the weight of defeat. In the Führerbunker, Martin Bormann moved with a calm precision that contrasted the chaos above. He and Gestapo chief Heinrich Müller managed the last operations of a city under siege. Tunnels beneath the Reich Chancellery became storage for documents, gold, and counterfeit currency. Hitler, weakened by illness and paranoia, became almost secondary. Bormann's calculations had shifted entirely toward escape, the preservation of what remained of the Nazi leadership. By April 30th, 1945, deception had become the weapon of choice. Müller orchestrated doubles for Hitler and Eva Braun, bodies meant to be burned in the Chancellery Garden to simulate suicide. The remains, charred beyond recognition, left uncertainty in their wake. No Allied or Soviet observer could confirm what had truly occurred. Meanwhile, a Ju-52 aircraft waited on a hastily prepared airstrip. Disguised, Hitler and Eva Braun were led through tunnels, moving out of the city toward the unknown. Travemünde, a northern German airfield, became the first waypoint. Here, flight plans were reviewed, routes adjusted. Declassified German documents note Bormann's direct oversight. Every transfer of money, every forged passport, every silent instruction ensured the journey south remained feasible. The next leg carried them to an airstrip near Rota, Spain, where refueling was quietly handled by Franco's regime. From there, the flight pressed on to the Canary Islands, a staging ground for the maritime leg. U-boats, U-530 and U-977, waited, their movements noted in Allied intelligence reports as suspicious but unexplained. Submerged for weeks, these vessels were part of Operation Seawolf, ready to ferry the passengers across the Atlantic to Argentina. Conflicting reports clouded the narrative. The Soviets declared Hitler dead in the bunker, yet dental records were incomplete, and witnesses in Spain, Morocco, and Argentina suggested otherwise. Some described sightings of a man resembling Hitler, always cautious, always guarded. The theory of doubles persisted, supported by Soviet testimony, hinting that Berlin's final drama might have been a carefully staged illusion. By coordinating aerial and maritime routes, the Nazi escape network demonstrated unprecedented planning. From the streets of a destroyed Berlin to the quiet waters of the South Atlantic, the operation relied on timing, secrecy, and the unwavering commitment of men like Bormann. And somewhere between the Canary Islands and Mar del Plata, the Reich's final act of evasion began. Waves slapped the hulls of the U-530 and U-977 as they approached the quiet Argentine coast. On July 10, 1945, U-530 surfaced at Mar del Plata, the crew exhausted from months at sea. Few asked questions as the submarine slipped into harbor, its cargo unrecorded, its journey cloaked in silence. U-977 followed on August 17, 1945, after an astonishing 100-day voyage under the Atlantic, submerged almost entirely. Commander Heinz Schaefer's logbook mentioned nothing of extraordinary passengers, yet rumors quickly spread of secret landings in Necochea and Puerto Madryn. Metal crates, mysterious figures, whispers of the Reich's elite stepping ashore. The reception network was already in place. Ludwig Freude coordinated the transfer of cargo and personnel, directing movement to remote ranches in Patagonia like Moramar, and estates scattered across Bariloche and Villa La Angostura. German colonies in southern Argentina offered shelter, kitchens, and silence. Local farmers later recalled unusual shipments and foreign guards, yet curiosity was tempered by fear and deference to Perón's government. Every arrival seemed prearranged, every stop part of a carefully mapped escape plan. Meanwhile, Allied intelligence watched from thousands of miles away. FBI files and U.S. naval intelligence reports noted irregular submarine movements, cryptic communications, and sudden absences from European ports. Declassified documents later confirmed that U-boats carried more than crew. They transported advanced technology, V-2 rocket parts, jet blueprints, and, possibly, the machinery of war itself. The accounts of Schaefer and his officers hinted at an unnerving endurance, 60 days of submerged travel, rationed air, silent propulsion. The press in Buenos Aires coined the term ghost submarines, feeding speculation of high-ranking Nazis arriving on the South American continent. Pre-existing networks smoothed the way. Front companies in Argentina had long-standing ties to Swiss and Spanish banks, already facilitating the flow of gold, cash, and valuables. FBI reports hinted that beach landings occurred before the official surrender, with merchant vessels under neutral flags waiting to ferry cargo inland and land. Even as the war ended in Europe, the Atlantic remained a corridor of secrecy and survival. In the remote stretches of Patagonia, the Reich's remnants found quiet lodgings, hidden among mountains and lakes. Supplies, money, and technology flowed steadily, forming the foundation of a shadow state far from the ruins of Berlin. And somewhere in those forests and valleys, decisions were made that would echo through decades. And then, the submarines vanished into history, leaving only whispers. Seaplanes skimmed the glassy surface of Lake Nahuel Huapi, their engines muffled by distance, as the Analco estate waited like a fortress hidden in the Patagonian wilderness. Around 1947, whispers claim Hitler and Eva Braun arrived here, stepping onto a property designed by Alejandro Bustillo, built for isolation. Private docks, seaplane hangars, underground storage, even generators for power, all allowed life to continue quietly, while the world assumed they were gone. Supplies came from Buenos Aires and Bariloche, brought by German businessmen and former officers, slipping along hidden paths and under the watchful eyes of sympathetic locals. Inside, routines were strict. Hitler moved in secrecy, met with former aides and financial coordinators, and reviewed reports on remaining networks in Europe and South America. Eva Braun assumed false identities, keeping out of sight, leaving only shadows at the Andino Bariloche Club. Josef Mengele, Erich Priebke, and other known figures passed through Bariloche, often for brief consultations or to transfer funds. The Perrons allegedly provided protection in exchange for technological know-how and political leverage. The surrounding forests, mountains, and lakes offered natural security, augmented by armed patrols and nighttime plane landings. Boats delivered crates of documents, supplies, even luxury goods. Dr. Otto Lehmann, a trusted physician, monitored Hitler's health, tending to the effects of age and isolation. The Nazi community quietly expanded in nearby towns: San Carlos de Bariloche, Villa Traful, Villa La Angostura. Other safe houses with hidden passages linked to Chile, creating a web of potential escape routes. Life was measured in secrecy, and the outside world rarely penetrated the veil. Even the locals who knew murmured little, fearing both the shadow of the Reich and the reach of Argentine politics. After Juan Perrón's fall in 1955, the estate's relative safety eroded. Government scrutiny tightened, journalists prowled nearby towns, Allied intelligence operatives scoured Argentina, and German hunters tracked even the faintest whisper of old networks. Hitler and Eva Braun became ghosts in their own refuge, slipping into smaller, more concealed properties, avoiding any chance of recognition. Local employees recall hushed warnings, unexplained movements at night, and deliveries that vanished into the surrounding forests. At this time, Hitler's health, already weakened by age and the lingering effects of war, reportedly deteriorated steadily under the care of Dr. Otto Lehmann. By February 13, 1962, according to research compiled in the book Grey Wolf, Hitler allegedly died quietly at Inalco. Former employees described a clandestine funeral held on the estate grounds under tight secrecy. Graves were simple, unmarked, with only the closest attendants present. Eva Braun lingered for several years afterward, maintaining her cover, slipping further into isolation. Then, too, she vanished, leaving no trace, fading from local memory and even from conspiracy theories. During this time, the 1960s saw a surge in efforts by Nazi hunters such as Simon Wiesenthal. He and others followed leads, collected testimonies, and mapped the remnants of Nazi escape networks in South America. Declassified FBI documents from Buenos Aires mention sightings of a man matching Hitler's description, cryptic messages sent via old contacts, and occasional financial transactions routed through front companies in Argentina and Chile. Each lead seemed tantalizing, yet frustratingly incomplete, building a persistent murmur that the world's most infamous figure may have lingered long after Europe had moved on. The mountains stayed silent. The forests swallowed movement. The lakes reflected an indifferent sky. And the world marched forward, unaware that the man who had shaped the century, who had commanded millions, may have spent his final years watching from the shadows, alive, planning, and always just beyond reach. Who would have imagined that the architect of such horror could fade not into history books, but into whispers, a phantom among the Patagonian peaks?